Irrational numbers. What are irrational numbers? Irrational number is a number that cannot be written as a ratio of two integers. Means irrational number cannot be written in the form of fraction. Difference between rational and irrational number. Now, how to identify which number is rational and which number is irrational? So here are some points of the difference to distinguish that the number is rational or irrational. The first point is rational numbers refers to a number that can be expressed in a ratio of two integers or in the form of this. Means rational numbers can be written in a fraction form, but irrational numbers cannot be written in the fraction form. Simply any number which is in the form of this fraction, it means that that number is rational number, and the number which are not written in the form of this fraction form means that number is irrational number. The further points are perfect squares. This perfect squares. What are perfect squares? When the square root of a number is integer, this number is called a perfect square. For example, this square root 4 is equal to 2. This 2 integer. When the square root of a number is integer, this number is called perfect square. Means this square root 4 is a perfect square because its answer is a integer. Similarly, square root 9 is perfect square because square root 9 equal to 3. Similarly, square root 16, square root 25, these all are perfect squares. Means the answer of their square root is a integer called perfect square. Now on the other side, what if the square root of a number is an integer is called perfect square, but if the square root of a number is not an integer, then that number is called surd. For example, this square root 2. When we solve this, when we took the square root of 2, then the answer is this 1.414, and this is not an integer. So this square root 2 is not a perfect square because its answer is not an integer. So this square root 2 is what? Surd. Similarly, square root 3, square root 5 are surds. Square root 7, square root 10, these all are surds because their answers are not integers. So this is the difference. Simply when the square root of a number is integer, it is perfect square. When the square root of a number is not integer, then that number is surd. Now all the perfect squares are rational numbers and all the surds are irrational numbers. Means this square root 4 is rational number and square root 2 is surd. That's why this square root 2 is irrational number. Number 2 is an integer, but square root 2 is surd because the answer of square root 2, this one, and this square root 2 is surd. Surds are irrational numbers. Simply the numbers whose square root answer comes integer, these all are rational numbers. And when the square root of a number is not an integer, means that number is irrational number. So this is the simple difference. Now about the decimals. All the repeating decimals are rational numbers. For example, this one 0.33333, here this 3 is repeating, and here 0.15555, here 5 is repeating, here 0.167167, here the number 167, these three numbers are repeating. So these are all repeating decimals, therefore these are rational numbers. So all the repeating decimals are rational numbers, and all the non-repeating decimals are irrational numbers. For example, this here you can see the numbers are not repeating. In this example, the numbers are also non-repeating. So these are all non-repeating decimals, and therefore they are irrational numbers. So basically there are 4 points. The first one, the point means there are 3 differences. First difference is the fraction, means when the number is in the fraction, that is rational, and when the number cannot be written in the form of fraction, means it is irrational number. Second point, that when the square root of a number is integer, means that number is rational. Here square root 4, square root 9 are rational numbers because these are perfect squares. On the other hand, when the square root of a number is not an integer, then this number is irrational number. Here square root 2, square root 3, square root 5 are irrational numbers because their answers are not integers. So this is second point, perfect squares rational numbers, surds are irrational numbers. The third one point of decimals. Repeating decimals are rational numbers and non-repeating decimals are irrational numbers. So these are the basic differences between the rational number and irrational number to identify that which one number is rational and which number is irrational. Thank you.